Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Council of Great City School CoSN K-12 Readiness AI Maturity webinar. We're doing this in conjunction with the National AI Literacy Day. Today, I have with me Chris Hagel. Um, Chris is the Volunteer of the Year Award winner for CoSN. Congratulations. What do you have to do to get an award like that, Chris, besides give up, all of your free time?
It's a lot of giving up your free time. It's also a lot of working on volunteering to help with some of the AI guidance that's come out this year, both from Teach AI, this work on the first version or the first iteration of this CoSN and Council of Great City Schools checklist that was out, helped a little bit with that one. And then really it's just getting out and telling the story of what we're doing in our district and, how CoSN has helped us with that. So
And you're doing some great things. Why don't you tell us a little about your role in the district, what your district is, and some other information about you?
sure. I am currently the executive director of digital learning here in the Peninsula School District. I kind of get a new title every time we get a new superintendent. So that'll be changing again this summer back to CIO, which was where I was previously to this. But this one, this title came along about 4 years ago when the last superintendent said, "Hey, you know what? I just don't want a technology department anymore. So I want you to go and talk to the teaching and learning department and figure out what you guys are going to do and how you're going to merge together." And so at the time, we merged to the Department of Learning and Innovation, which was a wonderful group of about 25 individuals, all the way from the help desk staff through engineering, through teacher coaches for, literacy and science, all up to our director of research and assessment and everybody in teaching and learning together. So it was a great 4 years that we spent together, which I think is what's kind of driven us and allowed us to move forward so quickly with the work we're doing on AI, because we have those relationships we've built so closely between technology and teaching and learning. We're a district of about 9,000 kids, about an hour south of Seattle. Um, kind of a mix of quite affluent and quite low income, both, just depending on the places in the district that you go. So, we're a very suburban district. Um, yeah, so.
Good. I'm looking forward to our visit, and we'll talk about that a little bit. For the audience, my name is Tom Ryan. I'm former CIO for the Albuquerque Public Schools and the former. I also spent 5 years with the Santa Fe Public Schools as a Chief Information and Strategy Officer. And I want to just touch a little bit on your title change that goes back and forth. The role of the ed tech leader, the CIO, the digital learning person, the strategist has really changed. When I started, we had homegrown, and that I am old with. You look like you have a choice about your baldness there, Chris. Mine is it's all
Barely.
natural. It's all natural. But we had our own homegrown applications for student HR, finance. We then moved to eventually off the shelf and implemented on-prem off the shelf software. Then we went to the cloud. The role of IT has gotten confusing. What do we do, especially in this world of cloud-based applications that you can implement your own system without really having a conversation with CIOs? In fact, as I do a lot of IT reviews for school districts across the country, and one of the common themes I hear is people are implementing buying stuff without ever talking to IT, and then you've really increased your data silos. And so I really used to recommend that CIOs reported to the superintendent. I no longer do that because some school district hired a break fix CIO, because that was the model they had, and that person isn't adding strategy value to the conversation at cabinet. So my title at Santa Fe was Chief Information and Strategy Officer, to emphasize the role technology plays across all aspects of education, from teaching and learning to finance. And how does the CIO become a strategy partner, whether it's with curriculum instruction, which sounds like your prior superintendent wanted to do, to just how do we move forward? And I used to think that just a couple of years ago, when with COVID and the workflow and the automation that we're trying to the dedication of our paper-based processes was really a transformative impact on schools. But It's really, I think, this AI, this is that fourth industrial revolution where everything is going to be redefined. Our roles, the work we do, what we value, that like it's happened in every other industrial revolution that we've had in the past. So I'm really happy to have you here. Our concept is to talk about the AI maturity tool that CoSN just released. I'm going to go over that tool. I'm going to talk about how you might use this tool to assess, self-assess. It's available online. We'll go over that in a second. And some of the things that we're trying to do to get the word out and try to get it in front of this, because we did not do this for social media and we just became victims to all the challenges. There's several bills that are going through that are getting bipartisan support at Congress for privacy and screen time and a variety of other issues that I think are going to be really impacted. There'll soon be some AI legislation, or at least to address problems that happen. Let's start with you had applied. There was a grant that was provided through partnership with AWS to select 4 schools that could have a half-day session where we would come in and work with the whole cabinet on starting out this AI strategy. One of the things, one of the processes was talking about in the application, what are you already doing? And Chris, your school district was out in front of all of the other applications that we had on what you're doing. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what you're already doing with AI in your district?
Sure. So, like I mentioned, having instruction and engineers sitting 10 feet apart from each other can really provide some pretty interesting uh, capabilities when you look at something new coming out in technology. And so, right when ChatGPT came out last year, is that last year? Yeah. It feels so long ago, yet not that long. When ChatGPT came out, my engineers and my our instructional facilitators were sitting talking about what is this going to do and how is this going to change education. And the instructional folks are sitting there saying, "Oh, it's not that different. You guys keep telling us that the new technology is going to do something and it's going to make education better." And after day upon day upon day of them having the same conversations, we decided we better go sit down with our high school English teachers, because this is kind of their calculator moment. Where many years ago that was 20 years or so, when calculators were really the thing and everybody's like, oh, this is going to be cheating. We had to have the same conversation with our English teachers. And so we started by sitting down with them and just saying, hey, this is where we're at. This is what's happening. And to their credit, they spent about 3 to 5 minutes that day just completely freaking out. But then they really came around within the hour that we were with them and just said, there's things that we've not liked about the way that we do instruction, and maybe this is what we needed to help us change. And so from that initial conversation, we kind of branched out into what we called last year our AI action research team. And so we brought together teachers from all different content areas, all throughout our secondary schools, and just sat down and said, let's take a look at what's out there right now. And we started in March of last year, and just said, hey, let's try some things out. Let's see what's going on. I still don't understand the technology well enough to really have much of a say in that, to be the leader that I needed to be at the time. But I said, you know what, we're going to learn together. We're going to sit here and we're going to figure this out. And then we're going to try some things, and we'll see what works and what doesn't work. And at the time, we didn't know much about how these large language models even worked and what was going on behind the scenes. And so we were really careful. We went out and got parent permissions to try anything in the classroom, and we had every single parent sign off that a kid was going to be giving this a try, or the teacher was going to give it a try, depending on their age level. And so we did that, and it led us to some really amazing insights into how kids are interacting with some of these AI programs, and what we need to work on, with the students, but also with the rest of our teaching staff. So that led us to, we had a couple of meetings in March and April, and by April they said, you know what, we're excited for next year, but we really need the district to come out and say something about what they believe around AI usage in the classroom, and what is going to guide us for the school year. And so we were really worried because it was really too early to start writing board policy at the time. We decided that the best way to handle this was to kind of just talk about what do we believe with what we know about AI right now, and what do we believe that this should look like in the classroom next year. And so we came out with a principles and belief statement that's on our website that we well, I co-wrote it with ChatGPT to start with, but then took it back to teaching and learning, and then also to that action research team of teachers that we had. And, everybody got their chance to put their voice on it. And then everybody kind of moved forward and said, yeah, this is great. And then let's build out a whole suite of FAQs and training modules for teachers. And so the teachers that were there kind of did some of that to start the year. It kind of is growing little by little. I was in a presentation a couple months ago, and somebody was talking about, the idea of 1,000 flowers blooming throughout your district is probably not the best way to go about adoption of AI, but it seems to be working for us right now. And we know we need to tend that garden a little bit going into next year, but we're constantly seeing new things come up, and every week I hear about something new. I got a email from a principal about a week ago and said, hey, I was having trouble kind of coming up with some behavior restorative practices for this kid that had some sort of behavior incident. She said, I just used AI and had it brainstorm some ideas for me and gave me some great ideas on what this kid could do to restore the relationship he had with the other student. We have teachers using AI image generators to help little elementary kids learn descriptive words and talk about, what did you want that sentence to be? And if you take that sentence and put it into a image generator, what does that look like? And then they realize, okay, so I wanted it to generate an image of a dog, but I really wanted it to be a fluffy dog. And, learning all of these other words. And it's just letting teachers have that exploration. And you don't have to script it all, but that's kind of what it's looking like for us. And so those are just some of the little simple things that we start to see when you give teachers permission to just explore right now and figure out what this is going to look like across the district. So,
it's what I heard you say is that you started the process off with teachers, and the worst thing I think you can do to a teacher is make decisions at the state or even in central office. You really need to have the voice of the people that are going to be doing it, the people closest to the problem, in order to make that happen. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the tool to that point. There's not the Teach AI. You volunteered and you were helped in the development of the Teach AI tool, as did I. And what we saw was there was a lot of work going on the instructional aspect. What do we do in the classroom? How could I use this with students? What are the issues of using it with students? Is it cheating if they're using it? All of those questions are still pertinent, and there's some good discussion going on about those. But we didn't see a lot of stuff. How do you support the classroom teacher? How do you support the student? How does the operations and the finance and the HR? What are the legal risks? What are the things around data that we need to put together if we're going to start looking at this? So just want to let people know that the intent of the tool that we've created was to be in partnership with those tools that are being created on the academic side. We just didn't feel like we needed to compete against that because we'd rather partner and do that. I think we're unique in developing out this tool that really looks at the rest of the district. And to that point, you need to have the rest of the district at the table in order to have that conversation. So why don't I go through the tool a little bit and just explain what this is. So we called it moving from readiness to maturity. So how do we not only start this conversation, but start to put like a life cycle plan? How do we grow this out in phases? We don't have to be perfect going forward. You can get the access to the tool. We've got on the CoSN website at www.cosn.org/AI. That will get you to a page that has this little information box, and there's two things that we're going to talk about here real quickly. Take the self-assessment. This was a tool developed by Amazon Web Services that can give you you can respond to this. You might want to do this in a group as opposed to on your own, because don't think anybody's going to be able to answer all of the questions that are on here, because it goes from legal to risk to cybersecurity to operations to leadership alignment with the instructional strategy of the district. So that self-assessment, is part of it. The other part is the maturity tool that we developed, and I'm going to talk about that as we go. This all started with a process where we invited several people to AWS offices in New York City, um, 9 months ago, that looked at this thing is going to have a significant impact. What do we do to get ready? I'm not sure that it was the LM or the Gen AI tools that were released a year ago were ready for prime time. I think there was a lot of stuff that wasn't. There wasn't guardrails that were actually needed, and then it became a race for market share. Either way, that cat's out of the bag. So we created this set, which has 6 domains: executive leadership, operational readiness, data readiness, technical readiness, um, looking at security readiness, and then legal and risk. So each of those have subdomains. Each of those subdomains have elements that we asked a set of questions. Do you have this? Have you considered this? And that's what generated the AI checklist. We moved from there to the AI maturity model that was just released at CoSN conference last week. In there, we have a kind of a sequence of phases that one should go through in the development of their AI strategy. It starts with a current self-assessment. The AWS tool will provide that. Now, that data is not saved. So once you get it, you can press to have a printout provided for you with all of the scores for you as an individual, but you can't go back and get it because it's gone when you're done, unless it's been cached on your device. So the readiness self-assessment allows you to start the conversation. Where are we? Where do we agree that we are? And then how do we move forward on certain things? It also is a way for school districts to start to have the conversation. We've had some school districts like San Antonio where the CIO took this to cabinet and they had a conversation. Where do we think we are on these things? I think the result of that was, oh my gosh, I didn't know it impacted that area. From there, you would go to how do I develop my current state, phase 2, maybe a validation of the plan. It's not always good to do a self-assessment because, as we say, as I do my IT reviews, we'll hear IT say we have all this, but nobody knows it exists. So for them, it doesn't exist. So how do we get multiple voices in, especially when you're looking at equity and hallucinations and making sure that we're not perpetuating bias through those tools. So how do we get this cross-functional group of people to do not only the assessment, but to start a conversation about where do we want to go? It sounds like those were things, Chris, that you did when your teacher stakeholder group. I forget what you called it, but you had conversations that were ongoing. Yes.
Yeah, our AI action research team is what we call them. Just yeah, we've and a lot of the things in the maturity tool, teachers don't realize that all of these things take place behind the scenes. And so I think, working through this and, our upcoming workshop as well is going to really help kind of even cabinet to realize that some of these things need to take place. So, yeah.
And then moving from, I love the fact that you called it a research team. It wasn't implement. We don't know what we're implementing. We're going to go discover. I've made a joke a few times. At one school district I was at on an issue about whether we should allow certain social media that was blocked. That is now commonplace. The cabinet had a discussion, but 50% of the cabinets thought we shouldn't implement or shouldn't release it. We should continue to block. And when I asked the group of you that said no, how many of you have an account or ever used it? None of them. And so I said to my superintendent team, we're going to have the people that are least informed making decisions about how we move forward. That's not where we want to be. even if even if you're going to block AI, and we have about, I think from our latest CoSN survey, about 13% of school districts are actively blocking it. That is way down from June, when we first had, right before we had this session for the checklist, which was about 50%. So we're seeing groups, even if you're going to block it, you should know why and make that decision on an informed basis. So we have this kind of a roadmap that we've defined. It starts out with this assessment of your current state. If you look here, you've got the one, this is under executive leadership domain. It's under a strategy subdomain. So these are issues around strategy. And then these elements help define what the team felt went under strategy. So alignment with educational objectives. And it's not, does AI align with our educational objectives? Is how would I use AI and make sure that I align so it's not a one-off or take a distraction from our instructional program. Then it has infrastructure, resource management. I'm not going to go through all the slides. You can download it. It has a description of what each of those elements are. And then if you move in, I think I have a zoomed in. Yeah, so this would be a zooming in on one cell. So this is 1.13, the element about cross-functional dynamics. We know that it has to be owned by a broad group of stakeholders, not just one CIO. What we've done is on level one, which we call emerging, the description is you don't have cross-functional teams for overseeing AI. And so there's no documentation, there's no minutes, there's no charter. And then the recommendation here is, and this is a pretty basic one, but you need to bring together some of those key stakeholders and create a team. If you're at level two of cross-functional team, you may have the team, but it doesn't cover all the aspects of AI. It may not cover your major stakeholders, and you've got some missing groups. So it talks about what evidence might you see, and how do you move now from this level two to the level three. Level three is that you've got a fully functioning team. You've got policies that are enforced and monitored. You've collected data on how those policies are impacting the district, and you're looking at you would have documents like a charter of that group, how often they meet, minutes that come from that. So each one of the elements has these levels of maturity, and you would identify what evidence do we have. I talked about it. The superintendent said we should do it. We had a conversation at cabinet. All of those are hopes. Until you have a document or some evidence, it's a hope, and we want to move from hope to a plan. So the whole the whole assessment is built around these. What this also gives you, if I'm at a level one and I want to move to a level two, it gives you some recommendations on what things should I start to do. How would I prepare for moving this up? And what also makes this really important is we've had a lot of superintendent turnover in the last few years. I think that's going to continue. Part of it is the political climate that you have to operate when in your schools. Part of it is there's a lot of old people like me that are deciding it's time to retire, go fishing, or travel the world. So having a document and a process that's adopted by the cabinet and the board puts some stability into your planning process as you create these life cycle initiatives going forward. The second button that's on that website is the AI readiness self-assessment. It is aligned with the same process that I just showed you. It allows you to pick one of those. There's no way to identify your level or your evidence. Once you've completed the survey, it will give you a readiness self-assessment and talk about where you are in the group. You could take those and add them up from everybody on your team to be able to have a common framework. In fact, Chris, I think you've taken the assessment. What did you think about that tool?
I did take the assessment, and as you were talking a little bit ago, I was like, yeah, that's part of the problem on why I scored myself so low on some of these is because, we've had a lot of conversations, and as you referred to them, so we have a lot of hope, but we don't have documented things in place. And so, there's some places where we scored really well in, and some places we didn't. And a lot of that has to do with, and it's kind of been a problem in our district for years, is kind of the building out the processes and procedures. We have a lot of conversations. We're going in that direction, but actually documenting it, getting it on paper, and following through with it is sometimes where we struggle a little bit. So, yeah, I think that the assessment was great. I did do what you said not to do and just do it by myself. But I think, we'll work through this. I think there might be some areas where people disagree with me here and there and a little bit in just some of the minutia, but I think it's so much better than and I helped with the first checklist. I'm not going to disparage it, but it's so much better to have this model where because when I did the checklist and it was it's a binary, do you have this or don't you have it? And I was like, well, can't say that we have that, so I'm going to check no. And so then you look through it and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much work to do. When you look at the maturity model this way, you can see that it's so different. There's different pieces of it, and so you're like, well, we have some of that, but we don't have all of it, so I don't have to mark no that I don't have that, and it's much better it doesn't look so bad so bad as the first checklist did when we went through this, because there are pieces in place and there's varying degrees of those in place. So yeah, it was quite beneficial to go through this.
So I want to encourage people, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We'll answer those, or Jill will jump on those as quickly as possible. We'd love to hear if you have questions from Chris or Chris and I about the tool, how it's developed, what recommendations you have for improvement, or things that you really agree on. We'd love to have that conversation also. I have an opportunity. The Council of Great City Schools is a co-partner in the development of the tool and the publication of this tool. And the council, which is large urban districts across the country, has JABA-like conference sessions. So they might have large districts chief operating officers, large district chief academic officers, large district CIOs, CHRO or HR officers, finance people. And I end up presenting at each of those conferences about the need for understanding and developing a strategy and a roadmap for your district around AI. When I present those, I inevitably get somebody or multiple people that'll stop me during the 3 days that we're there and say, you just blew my mind. I had no idea. I used this to write a letter of recommendation. I used this as helping me do an email. And what I found in talking to people, they use a GPT to do one thing, and they just do it over and over and over. They're really good at writing that letter, but they don't explore all the other potential that this has. And so what we try to do at those sessions is customize it. So how would I use this as a CFO? And then show that it should be an iterative or an interactive process of having it ask questions and answering those questions and changing the response, and have this interactive process for you to come out with whatever the answer, as opposed to like a Google search, what's the capital of Illinois? You want to be using this, and you want to understand that what it gives you doesn't necessarily represent truth. It represents some ideas that have been published out on the internet. So we talk about how generative AI works. We talk about what's bias and hallucination. We talk about how this specifically helps different groups. The last group, which was actually this week in Phoenix, chief operating management, people would stop me and say, I loved your session. It scared the heck out of me. And I thought, I'm not sure that's a good thing, but they were saying, now I know, and I know we can't ignore it anymore. And so hopefully out of this tool, we're able to see how this impacts each unit. Like you just reinforced, the COO is going to have a whole different perspective on this and a way to answer those questions than you may. So we want to build an understanding, some knowledge, and then moving forward. Santa Fe Public Schools in New Mexico, they're having their leadership team all go through some prompt engineering courses so that they have a more in-depth understanding of what we're doing and how we might be able to leverage this for benefit and a better appreciation on how do we mitigate some of the risks as we develop our policy work going forward. So going back to the tool, one of the things you saw the AI or the AWS results. What you want to do is identify where you are, identify where you're going to go, and then have maybe a smaller team start to put an action plan on how do we move from our current state to the future state that we desire, knowing that this is changing exponentially quick. What we were talking about in June about generative AI, ChatGPT when it came out, and what we're talking today are completely different presentations. I do these presentations work with these groups to help develop their plan every other month. And I have to redo what we're doing because something else comes out, some new functionality, some new risk. Some of those risks they're trying to not release until after the next election in the fall because they're very concerned about the abuse. Although the bad guys already know how to misuse it and are doing things. You've seen videos they take capturing voice and mimicking those. There's some real threats, and we're not ready from a digital citizenship perspective to really leverage that. Chris, you've talked with enthusiasm about how you've adopted this. You've got this action research team put together. What was it about this that you decided, hey, I'm going to make this happen in our district?
This is my 25th year in K-12 ed tech. And so I've seen things come and some things go, and, adoption of new technologies that may or may not make it. And, it's just one of those, it's one of those things that I was really, I reflect on a little bit because, one of the things that I think sometimes we get away from in the tech leader role is, stepping back from the day-to-day, just constant drama of what we need to do and actually spend a lot of time or spend some time just visioning for what the future needs to look like. And so our current superintendent has been pushing on that a lot. And she uses this analogy of, you need to be on the balcony watching the dance floor, not in the dance floor, to be able to see, kind of figure out how you're going to lead moving forward. And so, I sit back and I think, and I've been talking about things like data integration for almost 20 years. I remember presenting about, being frustrated with tools that didn't talk to each other. And there's been ideas I've had over the years that I've never been able to pull off because I don't have the possibilities. And I was sitting talking with a vendor recently who's working on a product, and I finally said, this is something that I've wanted to do for 10 years. Either I didn't have the technology that allowed me to make it happen, or I didn't have the capability because I'm in a small district and I have maybe one guy that can help me with it, And finally, with some of the AI functionality and features that are coming out, some of the things that I've dreamed about for years are finally doable. They're finally something that you can make happen. So, and everywhere I go, everybody I talk to that kind of, sparks just a small idea leads me to 10 other ideas that I can then build off of. I was at a conference on, I don't even know what day it is now, Monday, I think, and it was put on by some people from Stanford talking about building your own chatbots, and it spurred like 5 different ideas that I'm now bringing back to, to help parents or to help teachers, or, there's just so many possibilities that I don't think anybody's even really thinking about right now that are out there, and you just need that spark to get an idea of what you can do, and then how that's going to impact education and how it's going to make a change. And so, I'm so enthusiastic about it, and I've been so enthusiastic just because I can see some of the possibilities. And yes, there's a lot of hurdles to get over to get to them. But that's what we do in this role, and that's what we've been doing in this role for decades now. So let's get over the hurdles and get moving forward, because I think there is so much positive that it can do to help education and to change education. And that's a lot of why I'm so enthusiastic.
That's very cool. We have our CoSN board chair, Diane, has put into the chat. What does a task list look like after a team has scored themselves? I'm going to come back with that when we talk about how we're going to go out to your school district and work with your cabinet. So if you have other questions, please put them in there. And Diane, I'll get to your question. I want to build off of a couple things that I wrote down that Chris said, and something that I find also true. Um, Building off of small ideas or other ideas. One, if you're interacting with the GPT correctly, you're having it develop ideas that you may not have thought of. In fact, you can have it give you two different solutions to the same question. You can prompt it to say, here's my challenge. I'm trying to do these. Give me two different ways that I might approach it. And being able to compare and contrast, sometimes the light goes on and says, oh, that's a great idea. I've been able, when I do these presentations, I try to use creative ideas, like you just said, Chris, small ideas that somebody has a challenge with in their workplace on tracking things. I took most recently, I took a spreadsheet that is a travel reimbursement form for the district, but it's just in an Excel spreadsheet. And it has, where do you went, and then the different categories of airfare or parking or food or transportation and other categories that you would get reimbursed. Then you got to provide receipts, put the amounts in the sheet, and send it in. And so I was talking to a guy who took a receipt and then had ChatGPT itemize from the receipt different things that then it went to. And I said, well, that seems like an awful lot of work. What would be better if you could just take the spreadsheet and have it fill it out. So I loaded and I've got, I was using at this time, although I used many of the different GPTs, I was using ChatGPT 4. I loaded up the spreadsheet. I dumped it in there, said, this is a spreadsheet. I got to fill it out. Basically, I'm going to give you images of the receipts, put them into the form and see what happens. I thought I was going to have to get more specific about put this in that cell kind of a thing. But I took pictures of those receipts and I had, say, 6 or so, and there were a couple of food ones. On the report, you had to outline, you would add up all your food and just put it into the one cell. I didn't tell ChatGPT to do it. And from the pictures I took, some of them were handwriting where I said, here's a tip and here's a total. It correctly identified that this is a airfare receipt. This is a Uber receipt these are food receipts. Put them in the right column, added up those other things into the one column, and gave me the report that was downloaded into an Excel format that I could submit I was shocked at how little, just all I had to know was a little bit of English, but it all stemmed from that conversation about here's an idea. Wonder if I could build on that idea, and that collaborative nature of whether working with a tool or other people to create some pretty amazing things. Is very exciting. I mean, it gets you really revved up about how I might be able to use this. The chief operating officer took a picture of their playground area and asked the GPT to study the image and provide recommendations based on some safety framework. And it came out with things that you should be looking for in this playground area that I might be able to use. But I've had people take graphs from finance reports and say, compare this to last year and tell me about what's the difference. There's just a ton of ideas. And certainly the CIO can't think of all of them. I mean, they're not living in the life of these other folks. So I started to create a prompt library for K-12 leadership to just capture some of the things that people are doing, and then writing the prompt and saying, try this in your district and see what kind of an impact it will make. Once you've opened their eyes that way, you seem to get people pretty excited. Have you done some work, Chris, with outside of your teacher research team?
Yeah, so we much like I think it was Santa Fe that you mentioned, I did a 4-hour workshop with our entire cabinet on prompt engineering. about a month ago, um, which was great because I started it because we had all these differing levels of usage of some of the tools right now, and I just started from the beginning to level set everybody on the cabinet so that we were all when we finished the 4 hours and they had built their own custom GPT that helped rewrite things that come out of chat GPT. They had learned 4 or 5 different prompt engineering patterns that could be useful to them. We talked about things like custom instructions and how you can get ChatGPT to provide you much better responses to the things. And so, that kind of helped level set everybody from, not just myself and some of our teaching and learning team who are pretty adept at it, but our HR director, or executive director, or chief finance and operations officer, and in talking with her yesterday, she's said, I'm using it every single day now for, something. And so it really helps kind of grab everybody and get them to the same page so we can start having these conversations about what it can do and how it can impact you. I love the idea of the playground. I've played with that on a personal level for different ideas, but never with that kind of framework. And we're going to definitely try that one, taking it out of here. So
I also did one where I said, act as a help desk chatbot using the ITIL framework. Input, I'll ask you questions. Output, follow the ITIL framework with a response. And then I started out with, what's my password? I was amazed at how well, without any district context, it told me to work through. And then I gave it a little bit more complex one. I can't get to the finance system. And that could be a device, it could be a network, it could be the system. There's a lot of different ways. And it started leading through a series of questions that identified where they should target, where the issue might reside, so that they could start putting together a solution. The playground one, somebody told me that a person, if you wanted to sell your house, you could take a picture of the inside rooms and ask it to give you a recommendation as in the persona of a realtor on what would be beneficial. And I thought, well, if it could do that, I wonder if it could do this playground thing. I mean, you build off of those ideas that create something better. And if you got multiple people working on it, you can do something real very quickly. I also find that there's the one-off prompt that you want to put in, but where this is really going is in a workflow scenario where you're using a prompt that generates some questions, that answers a response, that moves it over to the next part in the organization. You've got a workflow alignment and process that's going on. I know that you have implemented your own GPT. Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, so we've done a few. We're working on some other ones for the coming school year. One of the ones that we've started playing with a little bit, and I got this idea, I'll credit Rob
So
Dixon.
before you go on, what does that mean? You've done your own GPT first.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Sorry. Take it back a step. So with the paid version of ChatGPT, and there are other ways to do this now, there's a lot of companies coming out with their own products as well. And you can do this for free on some other tools as well, but you can pre-load a custom version of an AI chatbot with specific directions or specific instructions, I guess, you can also preload it with specific knowledge and documents and data that you want it to access. And then it can answer custom questions about the data that you're looking at or the documents that you're referencing. So the first one I built just to test this out, and hopefully we'll have a production ready version of it by the start of next school year. I worked with our director of research and assessment, and we uploaded our district's entire strategic plan, both the public one-page facing document and our 30-page in-depth strategic plan, as well as all of the current data that is matching the metrics that we're measuring in the strategic plan. And I kind of got this idea from Rob Dixon in Wichita, so I'll credit him because I stole it. I stole the idea and kind of made it my own. But from there, then utilizing a custom GPT on this, you can ask questions about, like, for instance, How does my student sense of belonging data? And, before I get too far into this, I may want to make sure all the data that we put in there is general public facing data. It has no identifiable information in it. I would not do this with student data right now. There might be ways to do that safely, but this one is, already cleaned data. Most of it came from the state anyway. They take out any data points that might allow you to identify students, all of that kind of thing. So it's very generic data, but yet still specific enough to our buildings. So I took that, and you can ask questions of it now, like, tell me about our goals around sense of belonging, and then build me charts and graphs that show me school by school what our sense of belonging data is. And then it can spit out charts and heat maps and all of that kind of thing. And then it can also come back, and you can then ask questions like, what are some strategies that Artendale Elementary might use to improve their sense of belonging based off of the data that you have there? And so it's conceptual right now. We've played with it at cabinet a little bit to see if we can make it work. And it does work. We got some work to do. But we'd really like to put that out is something that teachers and principals can use going into next year. That's one example. I built just a simple personalized chat GPT or GPT that I then trained our cabinet how to build their own as well, because one of the things I've learned was that a lot of the responses that would come out of any of the tools, the AI chatbots, kind of had some language that I didn't really exactly like. And so I had taken, and I'd used this prompt for quite a while now, and it was, I'm going to give you 4 examples of my writing. Once you've analyzed all 4 of those examples of my own writing, I want you to rewrite the document that you just gave me in my style and tone. And so I'd been using that for quite a while. I finally realized that you could build that into a GPT so that then anytime you needed it, you could just call it and say, I think I named it How Chris Writes. And so my GPT, I can just call it, and you can work with ChatGPT and build through the conversation, and then you're like, all right, and then you tag in How Chris Writes and say, rewrite this in my own style and tone. You don't have to go through the whole process of doing all of the uploading all your documents every time. And so I taught our entire cabinet how to do that, so that as they generated things out of ChatGPT, they could then utilize that and figure out and make sure that the things that they were spitting out came out in the style and tone that they wanted them to have. And so those are just a couple of examples. We're working on some other custom ones going into next year, but we'll see how those go.
I'd like to reiterate, because I was going to ask you anyway, but you've said it, but I'm going to reiterate. You're not loading, even though you've got your own GPT, it's still public.
Yep.
And all the data that you put in there becomes public. And so PII is really important that they're not, I've heard horror stories about people writing IEPs for students in their class and putting in data that probably that'll get them in trouble. Legally, it'll put them in trouble and embarrassing yourself in the district as that stuff goes out there. So don't put PII into any into your private or into your GPT, even if you've created your own. We've got a question from Bill. When you built your own GPT, does information you load? Oh, so he's asking, is that public?
Exactly what you just said, yeah.
And then the second part of that is, and I know I can answer some of this, is it possible to create a private GPT for which the data does not become public?
Yeah, so do you want me to answer? Or you want to go?
Yeah, we'll both answer it. So go ahead.
Okay, so that is one of our projects that we're working on for next year, actually, is looking at either self-hosting or hosting on a cloud service, a private large language or private language model that can interact with our data that doesn't get pushed out into the major foundational models. And so there are ways right now that you can do that. I would not recommend that people do that, natively into ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of those. There are some things you can do, and get data processing agreements with those big vendors, but they're really hard so far, I've found, with K-12 schools to get any of that kind of access. But there are some things you can do with some of the cloud vendors that will do, or hosting yourself. So we've been playing a lot with hosting some local models and building chatbots off of those. So there are ways to do it. It's not easy yet. Nobody's made it simple. But for the most part, I would be very leery to use any of the big foundational models right now to do that.
In talking to some of the bigger AI players, they have already started those in finance and healthcare. You talked about your taking that you've got to tend your garden, and this is where you're building your walled garden. That's going to create a whole other set of issues. I know there's some companies, because I've talked to them, who are starting their own GPT, a private GPT that you would load inside your district, so that you could mine all of your data and to be able to build. Now, that has in and of itself a whole other set of things. One, is your data clean? Do you know who owns
Yeah.
that data? So there's a lot of cleanup that we have to do, that we've had to do whether we're doing this stuff or not. So having these companies come in, because I see that's the next phase, right? We're in this awareness phase this year. You've already started. I've already talked to several people that have started their own GPT, but it's still on the public side. You're going to start seeing next year where we implement these private GPTs in, and that's going to bring up a whole other who has access to those data. How are you keeping it secure? How do you make sure that the PII that would be inherent in something like that doesn't get out or misused when people try to run reports, not understanding correlation and causation, and then what makes it an official? Who has the official authority to say this is what our rates of dropout or access or improvement or PD, any of those things? So there's a ton of those. So let's go into the models before we run out of time. And I am going to queue you up with what do you see the future for your district, and what recommendations would you have for people to go forward? But let's talk a little bit about the program that was offered by AWS, and for the council and CoSN for 4 districts to pilot a cabinet level conversation. We've selected the 4 schools. I've already mentioned, Chris, that you were one of those. We're going to come in for a half-day session. We'll have all the cabinet. These will be cabinet members. This is run by the superintendent, not the CIO or someone else. And the cabinet members will go through the assessment, will tally up their scores to give a district score, at least from the people that took the assessment. And then we're going to spend 4 hours on talking about what is our current state, what is the potential moving forward, what are the things, because we also know that we'll have school districts who may have their digital learning coaches developing content for teachers, but no one else knows about what that content is, what the risks are there challenges with procurement? And also, those people that are developing with good intent are not aware of the PII or cybersecurity or federal laws that may be impacting what they do and how they do it. For example, I've heard people talk about, you can take a whole email stream and run it and get a summary and give key points and things that's all true, but it'll also have the name and any other information that you just made a public. So you want to be careful, and you can get into a habit of just saying, I can throw this stuff out there, and it'd be cool to get this stuff back without realizing they put it at jeopardy. So we're going to take a 4-hour session, talk about the potential, and then through a series of prompts using a AI engine, Gen AI engine, we'll start to look at how do we build a roadmap, to Diane's question earlier, to get us from our level 2 on the screen here. We've got level 2, or level 4, or level 1, and our goal state is something greater than that. We're going to use the AI tool to help us to create a roadmap for improvement on these areas. Now, under the leadership team, you're going to have strategic teams that are going to be implementing projects or coordinating instructional projects, finance projects, operation projects. And then you're going to have people that are actually charged with doing something to get there. So I wouldn't see the cabinet level team driving the roadmap as far as all of the practical projects, but they would be driving the direction of a number of different projects that would be coordinated through the district, and tying what that professional development we're trying to do with teachers, are we sure that it's aligning with legal, we're identifying risk, we understand bias, and that we're creating something that we can get behind and be proud about going forward. Is there any hope in that, since you're that first one of our districts that are going to be doing this, is there some hopes about that process that you would like to see come out as you get prepared for your next step in this model?
Yeah, I was thinking it through a little bit while you were talking, and then when Diane asked that question, um, we're going to be starting next fall a big transition in a new ERP system. And so historically on that side of yeah, um, historically on that side of the house, we've never really we've done a really good job on the student information side of focusing on, data access, data governance, and some of that work, but we haven't always done that on the HR and business office side. And so um, I'm really excited about the possibility of working through this and then having conversations about, some of the building some of the data governance, but also the importance of machine readable data for the next 10 years, because, we have so many things that we still are like paper files or scan PDF, scan files or whatever that aren't really, they may become more machine readable in the future, but, looking at the possibilities of what we might be able to do, the more that we think that through and have that in the back of everybody's mind and not just the CIO sitting there saying, well, we need to do this. But, when the CFO is planning out her, change in business systems, knowing that she needs to make sure that these things are taking place and we build the right pieces in place and the structures around that, I think it's going to be hugely beneficial for us to, as we start moving on some of these other departments and things that are going to happen moving forward.
Yeah, I'd like to, again, before we got just a couple of minutes, but if you know some tools that are um, helping move forward, or load up your own GPT, or that private stuff, put some of that stuff in the chat, share your information with each other, and get that going. As we look at the future here, and I'm going to end on your recommendations, but I said we are in an awareness stage, getting to understand what this is, being able to create policies and understand. That's why we're at the 1 or 0 level on most of the assessments. The second part of this is the implementation. Often in implementation, you're going to mimic the way you did your paper-based process, for example. In your ERP, I know that I have implemented a couple of these, and I hear the horror stories across the country. The technology works, but people just don't like change, and being able to lead that change is a challenge. Hadn't thought about, so one of those little ideas, that small ideas that come to better questions that lead to bigger ideas. Hadn't thought about leveraging a GPT into looking at questions and processes and roadmaps as a part of your ERP implementation process. But what a wonderful way to start to engage a community, small group, a stakeholder group, that you can start asking questions, etc., so that you don't implement the same. You don't make the new system, break the new system to operate like the one that you had from 15 years ago operates. But that is a common problem across the board with these, as well as all the data that's poor. The third thing, which is probably 2 years from now, is going to be how are we transforming the way we do our work in each one of the categories of an organization like education, where it doesn't look familiar anymore, because we now know the process, we now know the capability of those technologies, and we now start moving into transformed work. So there's some real potential. That transformed work could be bad things that happen also, that we need to take a risk. So as we move forward, Chris, looking at your recommendations for school districts that you'd like to leave, what are some recommendations that you would like to leave the group with?
Yeah, I think, it just depends on the district and where you're at. Like some of this, and I tell this to a lot of districts out there because people ask all the time, where do I start? And you just have to start. You just have to start experimenting because you're not going to get the ideas. Some of the things like I've been taking notes of Tom's ideas all day today, because I hadn't thought about that exactly. But boy, I now know enough about some of these tools and these things to be able to say, all right, that does make sense. That could actually impact, I'm going to take, for example, we are in the process of redoing travel procedures. And your little, your example of that, and I keep thinking, how can I build that into a system to make this work? And, you just have to get going. Um, you know, there's still a lot of districts, and I hope the people on this call are a little bit farther down the road, but there's still a lot of districts looking for guidance. Look at the work that CoSN's done. Look at the work that TJI has done. Look at the work of the 7 states that have already released guidance, and just take some of that and just use it and then get started. Adapt and adjust as you move on. We're going to learn, like, everything is changing so fast and so quickly that, things are different this week than they were last week, and they're going to be different next week too. Trying to figure out your plan for the next 5 years is going to be really hard. So just get started, do what you can that you're comfortable with, what you think you can do safely, and then just get moving, and then slowly add on from there. And then lean on the people that are out in front of you. Lean up. If you need an AI guidance policy, just take mine. Like, that's what I tell a lot of people. Just steal the one off our website. I don't care. That's what it's there for. Or take any of the others that are out there. Just get started, and then the more you get comfortable, the more you're going to have the ideas of how things are going to go and move forward.
Really appreciate your time, Chris. I appreciate CoSN for hosting this session. I know Jill has the recording that will be done. So thank you for all your work, and thanks, folks, for joining us for this conversation. Look forward to seeing you on our next CoSN call.